back to my channel. I just wanted to make a video wrapping up my challenge where I tried to read 30 books in 30 days. It actually took me 38 days, but I feel successful because I read 30 books. And so my Goodreads tracker said that I was way behind schedule in trying to meet my reading goals for 2023. And now at the end of having read 30 books, took me more than 30 days, but after having read 30 books with all the time that passed since then, I'm now only 7 books behind schedule. So for me, that is a huge win. I wish I had been able to do it in 30 days or 31 days. I wish I'd been able to read 30 books in the month of August. I wasn't able to do that. But like I said, I still feel successful because I read long books, I read enjoyable books, I read some really great things, and I didn't pause the other parts of my life to read. I was still being a full-time mom and wife and homemaker. What I'm saying is I was still doing all the other things while reading, and so I feel like I didn't push my priority list out of whack in order to focus on the challenge. So for me, this is a huge win. It is the most books that I have read in this period of time for as long as I've been tracking. So next time we try the challenge, we'll see if we can read in 35 days, 34 days, maybe even 31 days. So we'll try it again. So yeah, these are the final books that I read for the challenge. And you know, it's funny because I was trying to read 30 books. I've probably read way more than 30 books in any month in the last almost 4 years because I read a lot with my daughter. And I don't count all the children's books that we read from my reading tracking. So just putting that out there, that I may have met my goal long before I thought. But yeah, so I do include children's books in my number, and I'll tell you why I include some books and why I don't include others. So I'll tell you when I get to that. So here are the next few books that I read. So the last book that I told you about, I think, was One Day in December by Josie Silver. This is the next book that I finished. This is People in the Room by Nora Lange. The author is from Argentina, and this was translated from Spanish by Charlotte Whittle. And this was a book that, I mean, if not for this book, I probably would have finished my challenge like 3 or 4 days earlier because I spent about 4 days reading this short book. It's under 200 pages, but I feel like I couldn't read in more than like 10-page spurts. So this is very hallucinatory, I think is a word that one of the reviewers used to describe it, and I completely agree. We're reading from the perspective of a 17-year-old girl, and she is obsessing about 3 women who appear in a room in a house across the street from where she's living. And at first she starts watching them through the window, and then she starts interacting with them. They meet on the street, and then she starts visiting them. And in the encounters, we get to see a lot about her as she's trying to figure out who these women are and how they figure in her world. And so there's a part of this book that reads like a fever dream, that reads like a hallucination, but it's also like this voyeuristic exploration of someone's thoughts. Like what you think about people doesn't reflect so much about the people as it reflects on who you are. So the thought reveals who the thinker is, not necessarily the subject of the thought. And so this one really held my interest, even if I felt like I couldn't read it very quickly. So there were people who talked about whether the 3 women in this book were supposed to be like the Bronte sisters because they're mentioned in some of the writing about this author. This book was originally published in the 1950s, and it's taken 70 years for it to be translated to English. So I'm really happy to have been able to access this Argentinian author's works. So yeah, read this and don't have a word to sum it up, but yeah, really happy that I finished because like I said, it took me a long time. And then I read, what did I read after that? Then I read 2 children's books. So let's chat about the children's books. I read Madeline. I think it's pronounced Madeline by Ludwig Bemelmans. And then one of the follow-up, one of the sequels that was published recently by his grandson, John Bemelman's Marciano, and this title is Madeline and the Old House in Paris. So in the original, we meet Madeline, who the author sketched, I guess, her story using backdrops from France, using backdrops of Paris and Parisian sights, and showing a little girl as she traverses France and what life looks like. She seems to be living in some kind of an institution, and a little bit about her life. So like I said, it's a children's book, but it appears on a lot of lists as literary fiction. So that's why I count this book and not like some of the other books that I read with my daughter. So then I read this one, which, like I said, is a follow-up written by the original author's grandson. And because this book was first published in the, I'm going to say mid-1900s, let's find it. Cover illustration, copyright Ludwig Bemelmans, 1939. So what's that? 60, 80 years later. So about 8 years later, his grandson published one of the sequels. Bemelman's original author published some other stories using Madeline as the main character, but I guess that series had been kind of paused. So then recently his grandson picked up the mantle and has been publishing Madeline books again. And it feels like a natural succession. So I really like this. I really like these as companions, and we're going to go to the library and see if we can find more books in the series, because there are more books to explore and I like them. So yeah, these are the next two books that I read, is what I'm saying, Madeline. And what I really enjoy about this is that we get some historical references in the book. The illustrations are just really fantastic. Like, the illustrations are standalone pieces of artwork, and the rhymes are just like, they're great. They're great. They hold the interest of the adult, but they're simple enough that they could be enjoyed by children as well. So I actually read these solo. I didn't read these with my daughter. So now we're gonna have to read them together. So those are the next two books that I read, and then I read this emotional roller coaster of a book, which I got from the publishers some time ago, and man, this book gave me all the feels. It is The Man I Never Met by Elle Cook, and we're reading about a woman living in London who digitally meets or virtually meets a man living in Texas, and we read the progression of their relationship as they start this online relationship. And yeah, all the feels, like lots of emotion, all the feels. When I say all the feels, I mean all the feels. So yeah. And then I finished, and by finish I mean started again and finished this time, Frank Plantain by Zalika Reed Benta, who is of Caribbean background. This book follows a young girl named Cara. She is of Jamaican heritage, but she has been born and is growing up in Canada. And so this is a coming of age story. I really enjoy how Zalika Reed Benta writes about that unique experience of the child of immigrants. She tackles some tough subjects in this book, but the writing is so spot on that it's absolutely enjoyable. So high praises for this book. And then finally, an anthology, Black Ink, which was edited by Stephanie Stokes Oliver. So this is an anthology that includes essays that I have read previously. I didn't reread all of those essays. So I read some of this book, not all, because I've read some parts of this book before. So this is essays collected from 25 contributors, I think, and it is about the history of African Americans. And so the essays are collected from the writings of authors who lived before and writers who are contemporary. So in this we have essays sorted into three categories: peril, power, and pleasure, I think. So we trace the history of African Americans, like I said. So we have writers who are focusing on the life of people who were enslaved, and then focusing on how writing was used for civil rights, and then right now, authors, contemporary African American authors who are writing to show the power that exists, the power that is possible through ink, through mail. And so I love, man, I just love the fact that this book exists. It's a compendium of authors' works. Some of these are authors that whose work I've enjoyed over the years, and some of them are authors that I have never read. I've never read anything from Henry Louis Gates Jr., but I have watched him on TV. Is it PBS, where he does the genealogy studies for people? And in this one, we have Gates' work in unearthing and republishing lost writings of African Americans, such as his 1981 rediscovery of Sketches from the Life of a Free Black by Harriet E. Wilson, which is considered the first novel published by a Black woman in North America. So yeah, really, really happy that I read this. Fantastic way to round off my 30 book challenge. So yeah, I read 30 books and it only took me 38 days to do it. So next time we're gonna go for the challenge again, because why not? And we're going to see if we could beat this number and just see if we can make it a little bit more compact. If not for this book, I may have gotten down to 35 days, but got a little stalled here. But it's great. It's great. And I read some fantastic things. So I hope you join me when we come back for the next video, which is going to be a check-in on some other things that we've been doing. So thank you so much for watching this video. We'll be back soon with another video, and I hope you join me for it. Until then, happy reading. Bye.